Hey up everybody, I'm on to the next part at micro lathe that I'm building, and as you can see here I've got it took off this cabinet, this temporary cabinet that I made, and it's over here on these blocks now. So I've put it on them blocks for a reason, because a couple of months back I did a video and I mentioned I'd like to put it on some cast iron legs to make it look a bit more authentic if possible. And after that video, lo and behold, a fellow YouTuber and a fellow namesake of mine, Kev, he contacted me and he said he was taking his wood log burner out of his workshop to replace it with a new one, and I could have the legs off it if they'd be any use to me. So lo and behold, 2 months later I've had this package come, and he sent me these legs off his wood burner. So they're approximately 8" high, which is about the same as this temporary one that I made, and I'm going to attempt to see if I can get them fitted to this lathe. So I'm not going to be sure if they're going to be rigid enough for the lathe, but I'm never going to know that until I've actually tried it, am I? So and even if they're not quite as rigid as I thought, you know, there might be ways to get around that after a bit of thinking. So I'll just take you over to the lathe and I'll just briefly try and outline my plans to use these legs. So I've got my lathe now set up on this aluminium plate. A friend of mine up at our local track gave me this. I didn't know back then what I was going to use it for, but I found a use for it now. So this is going to be the base plate for the whole lathe and the motor assembly. So my plan is to put the motor on the back and have that fastened to this base plate, but have the lathe detachable from the base plate to make it more manageable to manoeuvre around if I need to. And then all I will have to do is put the lathe back onto the base plate and then just couple the belt up. So these legs that Kev sent me, they've got a cast recess or lip cast into them that must have fitted under the log burner. So I've been having to think about that, and I think I'd like them to be flat if possible, so they've got more surface area to contact to under the lathe. But having said that, they're going to be a bit difficult to grip for machining. I mean, anything's possible I suppose, but the only other alternative I could think of is I've actually got my lathe bolted to a steel plate here. That's always been bolted to that while it was on the temporary cabinet. So I'm going to leave it on that steel plate, and I'll probably fasten a right angled spacer in to coincide with that thickness and that size on the legs. That way I can leave the legs alone without machining them and have them fit flush up to the plate. So these legs are tapered both sideways and front ways, or sideways and back ways, whichever way you're looking at it, and they're going to fit something like that I suppose. So if I put this angle spacer in here on each corner, that'll accommodate the top bit. Then I can bolt the legs to this plate, then I can bolt the lathe to this plate also, and then I want this to be detachable from this base plate. So my plan is to put 4 angles on this aluminium plate, so that the feet of the legs just locate into the angles to stop the lathe being able to move either that way or that way. It'll probably also want bolting down with probably one bolt, just to, because when the belt tension's on it, it might be liable to tip it up, I suppose. So I could have an extra middle leg in here, and that'll give me a bit more rigidity, and also act as a clamping mechanism to clamp the lathe down. So that's my outline plan. So I think what I'll do, well, before I clean all these up and paint them, I'll have a dummy run and see if I can make this work, and then if I find it's rigid enough, I can dismantle it all, get these painted up, and jobs are good, I suppose. So I'll have a think about this, and I'll get everything stripped down, and we'll take it from there then. Come on then, let's have a look what I've been faffing around at here. I've managed to get the motor fitted onto this aluminium plate, so that's in position now. So what I'm doing here, instead of making them spacers that I said I was going to make to accommodate that lip in the legs, I've found out that there's enough surface area there for me to clamp onto. So what I've done, I've made some special washers so that when they bolt up to the legs, they fit inside that recess. Like that. So I've got my holes drilled in this plate. 1, 2, 3, 4. I had to have a bit of a practice here. I put 2 holes in the wrong place. It wasn't working out right, so I found out that I needed my holes there. So that's not a problem. I knew it was going to be a bit of trial and error. So I'll just get these legs fitted. Before I do that, when I said I was going to put some angle on the corners and for the feet to drop into, I found out that because they've got a nice right angle in the foot, I've put these cap screws in M8 so that the feet just drop onto that like that. So that will stop it moving that way and that way. Then I'm going to put a support in the middle to clamp the lathe down, I think. I'll just get these legs fitted on then. So them washers that I've filed at 90 degrees fit snugly into the recess in the underside of the legs. Then if my measurements are correct, these cap head screws here should fit in the corners of each foot. So if I take the lathe off with the actual legs attached, then to put it back on, I've just got to find them screws there, find the bolt that's going to come through this support, and then just one wing nut or thumb screw or whatever in the top to clamp it to the base. So the actual fixing points for the lathe bed is this hole, these 2 holes here, and these 2 holes. Well, that hole there was interfering with this leg, so what I've had to do is put this bolt extra long through and that will act as a dual purpose to clamp the lathe bed to with a nut on. Get this extra support made for the rear of the underside of the lathe bed. Get me fixing bolts and nuts made to clamp the lathe to this actual top, and then we'll reconvene and have another look at it. Well, I think that's it for this part then. I think they've turned out really great them, so I want to thank Kev again, a fellow YouTuber that watches me, for sending me them off his log burner. They've turned out really well. I was a bit worried that they might not be quite rigid enough, but with this centre clamping bolt that I've put in, it's clamping everything down to the base solid. So yeah, it's turned out really well. I suppose we're getting towards the end of it now. Now it's looking like a lathe a bit, but I have got a few odds and ends to tie up. I've got to make a main guard for this main drive, main pulley drive. Now I know where everything is attached, you know, where all the measurements are, where I'm working to. I've got to make a splash tray that's going to probably fit between the lathe bed and this top plate, just to catch any turnings. I've still got to mark some degrees off on my compound slide. I've got to make some collets for the Morse taper in the spindle, and I also want to make a cabinet for the front. I did come across this. I don't know where this came from, but somewhat similar to that. A wooden cabinet just to sit in front of it. I mean, that might do, but it's not quite as big as I wanted it to be, I don't think. So yeah, it's more or less finished, I suppose, now, but there's some odds and ends to tie off. So maybe a few more parts and I'll get everything tied off, and then probably start cutting some metal on it. But I don't suppose it'll ever be finished properly, because I'm still going to make, I've got some attachments I want to make for it in my mind for future. So it'll probably just keep evolving, I suppose. But as for where I wanted it to be, I'm more or less there now. So if you found that useful and interesting, give me a thumbs up and a subscribe, I'd appreciate that. And I'll catch you on next parts then. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.